Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of Chrysalis Effect. I am Monique White of Triumph Services, your host, and here in Chrysalis Effect, we are transforming mind, money, and manifestations. I hope everyone is having an absolutely awesome day and week. And today I want to discuss with you limits. This is a follow-up to last week's discussion on Know Thyself. And one of the factors that I brought up was the importance of limits and limitations. And as I reflected back on that episode, I thought to myself, well, let's do a deeper dive on limits. So that's what we are going to do today. So what is a limit? There are all kinds of definitions, if you will, depending on what sphere you're looking at. It means one thing in mathematics, but here are a couple of the definitions that I found. A limit is the point beyond which something doesn't go or extend. It is the utmost final point of something. A limit can be a restriction or boundary. And in the action sense, the verb sense, to limit something, is to confine or to keep something within a defined area. So why is that important? Why is it important for us to have limits? What purpose do they serve? Well, limits prevent burnout. Remember last week when we were talking about know thyself, that was one of the things we were talking about is when you know yourself and you don't have limits, you create this, a discord is created. So it prevents burnout. You're not going to overdo something when you come up against that boundary. Limits serve as guides for us. They provide organization. They limit the chaos, so to speak. And you can have different limits in different areas of your life. But the problem with not having any limits, and you hear all the time, live a limitless life, be limitless. The problem with that is when you don't have limits in one area of your life, you're diminishing another area. There might be another area of your life that needs attention, but you're focused on one point trying to be limitless. So having limits prevents distraction. Having limits, setting boundaries prevents frustration and overwhelm. And more importantly, they help us grow. That's part of maturing, right? Through experience and through growth, you get a sense of what will be tolerated, what won't be tolerated, your skills and your abilities, and you set healthy boundaries, which leads to happiness, increase in energy, and a positive mindset overall. Now, as I said, there are different types of limits, and your limits can be different in different areas of your life. Personally, as I said, limits help you grow. Setting limits requires a level of self-awareness. When I spoke last week and I was talking about know thyself, and I was using myself as an example where I knew I was on a runaway train. I knew I was coming up against that wall. You have to know what you are and are not capable of, which I mentioned Sometimes it's just not in our wheelhouse. It's just not in our area of expertise. You have to know that no is a complete sentence, right? So it's a limit about, personally, what you will tolerate, what you won't tolerate, what is acceptable to you, and what you won't accept. What is in the realm of your personal abilities and skills. And it really requires a self-assessment. So what are the types of personal limits? Limits on how many things you will say yes to. People pleasers struggle with this. No is a complete sentence. Limits on distractions. What will you allow to divert your attention? Limits on, you could even set limits on material things. And as I said, limits on what is acceptable and what's not acceptable. In the professional realm, on the flip side, limits on what you will devote your time to. Time management. I'm talking about habits here. If you do not have or set boundaries on a specific task, you can get caught up on one task and your whole day be gone, which decreases productivity. And there is overlap between personal and professional because, again, what will you tolerate? What will you not tolerate? And when you know these things and when you set these boundaries, you're providing clarity, not just for yourself, but for others who deal with you. You manage expectations, ensuring that you personally, your needs are met and that you're not being taken advantage of. Also ensuring that on the flip side, in the professional realm, or even in the personal relationship realm, people can assess for themselves whether you are the one who is able to meet their need. You're managing their expectation of you. So, knowing thyself and doing that self-assessment, you come to the, I don't want to say conclusion, but as you go through life and as you go through your journey professionally and personally, you develop boundaries. And I think back to a live that I did, oh my goodness, it must have been like 3 years ago. I live in a rural area, and I was taking my daughter to school, and we drove up on, you frequently see animals that were hit by a car on roadkill. And this particular day, when we drove by a field, in the field, I knew there was something because you could see the vultures circling. But when we got up on that particular point, there was a deer that had been hit, a dead deer, and it was encircled by vultures. And they were picking and eating and picking and picking. And they will pick that carcass clean. And with that analogy in mind, that's what happens when you don't set boundaries. When you don't have clear limits. Because if you're not clear, no one else is going to be clear. And people are going to take what you give. If you don't say no, they're not going to know to stop. And what ends up happening is you pick and pick, they pick and pick, ask and ask, expect, until all that is left is a clean carcass. And sometimes that's it. Without healthy boundaries, that's sometimes how you end up feeling too. So do not be afraid to set clear and healthy boundaries, limits for yourself and for your others. And for others, excuse me. So what does that look like? That looks like, for example, staying in your lane. I do a course, counseling versus coaching, the fine line. And that course is all about knowing your lane, staying in your lane, the ramifications of stepping out of your lane, knowing the limits of your profession. You know, as a nurse, I can't do surgery on someone. As a nurse, I know that I am not licensed to write prescriptions, for example. Stay in your lane. Know your limitations. For example, we'll take an athlete. What happens when you overwork that muscle? When you overdo it at the gym? You cross that boundary. What happens is, physiologically, is that muscle starts to break down. Lactic acid is produced. And too much lactic acid in your system results in acidosis, which impacts the rest of your organs. It begins to shut them down. That's an example of exceeding your limitations. But the good part about it is there are indications that you have met or are exceeding your limitations, right? You start to feel fatigued. Things start to hurt. You start to feel that pain. So there are always indications of when you have come up onto your own, are always indications of when you come up onto your own limitation. Going back to last week's discussion, I knew that I was at my limit. I knew that I was exceeding my boundary, that I was spread too thin. How? I was becoming overwhelmed. I was becoming short-tempered. Insomnia kicked in because my mind was constantly racing. I gotta get this done, I gotta get this done, I gotta do that for this person, get this done for that person. There were indications that I was at my limit. I needed to take time out. And so the same will be for you. Also, there is, and as I mentioned last week, the knowing the limit and knowing when to ask for help. Ask for assistance. We cannot be everything to everybody. We were not designed and created, indeed, to be everything to everybody. We were created for a purpose, on purpose. So know when you have reached your boundary and it's time to ask for assistance. Going back to that course, counseling versus coaching. knowing when your client needs more than you are capable of giving, and operating in enough integrity to refer that person out to the professional that can deliver to them and meet their need. Limits. Why they are important. They are important for everyone to be clear on their own skills and ability. They're important for respect, self-confidence, managing expectations, and they are required for growth. Required for growth. Because when you limit some things, you open the door for others. So do not be afraid of limits. Limit is not a negative word. It is. I'm not saying that you can't go out there and be all that you want to be. But even in doing so, in order to be all that you want to be, you must be able to set limits in other areas so you can achieve your goal. Well, that is all I have for you today. Know the value of limits. No is a complete sentence. And I want to thank you for joining me, for allowing me into your space. I encourage you to like and subscribe to this channel and to share this channel. Have an awesome day, and I will see you right back here next week. Bye-bye, everyone.